The feed is full of it. 22 years old and six figures, 19 and already building something. 25 and retired, technically if you count the passive income correctly. And somewhere in your chest when you scroll past those posts is a feeling you haven't named cleanly yet. Part inspiration, part something heavier, part a question that nobody in the success content space will answer honestly, because answering it honestly doesn't perform well. The question is, what does early success actually cost? And is the invoice shown upfront or delivered later? It is delivered later, every time. And the young men who receive it without preparation, who built fast, moved fast, arrived somewhere real before they had built the internal structure to hold what they'd arrived at, pay a specific price that the success content never mentions, because the success content is selling the arrival, not the bill that follows it. Peter Parker had power before he had the maturity to carry it. The ability was real, the results were real, and the cost of wielding real power before the character structure was ready to support it was also real, and it arrived in the form of every loss that followed the early wins. What that arc reveals about success at a young age is something worth saying plainly before you build something you aren't ready to hold. Here it is. Early success is not the problem. Mistaking the arrival for the development is the problem. There is a version of success that arrives before the person carrying it has built the internal architecture, the identity stability, the decision-making under pressure, the capacity to absorb setbacks without structural damage that the success will eventually demand. That version of success does not consolidate. It amplifies whatever was already present. If what was present was solid foundation, it builds on it. If what was present was unresolved insecurity performing as confidence, unexamined beliefs about worth and value, a self-concept built entirely on external validation, it amplifies those two, faster and louder than they would have developed otherwise. Parker's early wins were real wins. The power was genuine. What the wins exposed was not weakness. It was unfinished work, character that hadn't been tested under the specific pressures that success generates. The lesson was not that he shouldn't have had the power young. The lesson was that power without developed character is a loan, not a gift, and loans come due. The young man building something real right now needs to understand what he is building alongside the thing, not instead of it, alongside it. Because the external structure and the internal structure need to develop at a compatible rate. When they don't, the external structure eventually reveals every gap in the internal one, at scale, in public, with compounding consequences. Here is what nobody posts about early success: the loneliness of it, the specific isolation of being in a room, financially, professionally, socially, that none of the people you grew up with are in yet. The friendships that change shape, not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the reference points diverged and the distance became structural. The relationships that couldn't hold the weight of what you became before either of you knew that was going to happen. Nobody posts about the identity crisis that arrives 6 months after the first real milestone. The moment where the thing you worked toward is present, and the feeling you expected to arrive with it isn't. Where the external confirmation happened and the internal question, am I enough? Is this real? Does this mean what I thought it meant? Did not get answered by it, because external confirmation never answers internal questions. It just makes them louder. Stay with this. What I am about to say is the specific thing that separates the young men who build something at 23 and are still building at 33 from the ones who peaked early and spent a decade recovering from it. The ones who sustain it built their internal architecture at the same rate as their external results, not instead of pursuing the results alongside them. Every time the work produced a new level of external pressure, they did the internal work that the new level required. The hard conversation they didn't want to have, the honest accounting of what was driving them that didn't hold up under examination, the identity that needed updating because the old one was built on a foundation the success had outgrown. Parker's development wasn't separate from his work. It was conducted through it. Every loss, every failure of character under pressure, every moment where the power was real and the wisdom wasn't, those were not interruptions to the building. They were the building. The external structure and the internal one constructed in parallel. Whether he chose that or not, the young man who arrives at 30 with something real and the character to hold it is not built differently than Yude and Nuras, is not the one who moved fastest in his 20s. He is the one who treated the internal development as seriously as the external results, who understood early enough to do something about it, that the two structures need to be compatible, or the external one will eventually reveal every gap in the internal one. He is quieter than the ones who peaked early, less visible in the years when visibility feels most urgent, more honest about what he doesn't know yet, more willing to do the unglamorous internal work, the therapy, the honest conversations, the reading that challenges rather than confirms, the mentors who push rather than validate, that produces no content, generates no metrics, and builds the only thing that determines whether the external success compounds or collapses. The invoice for early success arrives. For every young man who builds something real, it arrives. The only variable is whether the internal architecture was developed enough to pay it when it does. You came into this expecting to be told how to accelerate. More tactics, faster movement, the specific things the successful young men did that you haven't done yet. The acceleration is not the missing variable. The internal architecture developing alongside it is. Every tactic without it is alone. Every result without it is a pressure test the character hasn't trained for yet. The young men who build something sustainable are not the ones who found better tactics earlier. They are the ones who took the internal work as seriously as the external work, at the same time, in the same years, without waiting for the success to make the internal work feel urgent. It will feel urgent, but by the time it feels urgent, it is usually already late. The time to build the internal architecture is before it is tested, the same way you build the suit before the battle. Parker learned this the hard way. You still have the option of learning it the other way. Right now, today, name one area where your internal architecture is behind your external ambition. Not the goal, the gap. The identity belief that hasn't been examined. The emotional pattern that works at the current level and won't at the next one. The character question that the success is eventually going to ask that you have been too busy building to sit with. Name it. Write it down. Not to fix it today, to stop pretending it isn't there. The pretending is what makes the invoice expensive. The naming is what starts the parallel construction. You are young enough that the internal work and the external work can develop together without either one being sacrificed. That window is the specific advantage of being where you are right now. It closes, not suddenly, gradually, as the external structure gets complex enough that all available energy gets consumed by it, and the internal work gets perpetually deferred. Success at a young age is not the gift it looks like from outside. It is an accelerated test of whether you built the person before you built the results. Start building the person tonight. The external work continues. It does not pause for the internal work, but a man who does both simultaneously, who treats the character development as load-bearing rather than supplementary, arrives somewhere at 30 that the man who did only one of them cannot reach, regardless of how fast he moved in the years before it. One question: what is the internal gap? The one area where your character hasn't caught up with your ambition, that you already know is there but haven't named out loud yet. Drop it in the comments. One sentence. The naming is the first build. If this said something the success content never does, subscribe. More of this. No six-figure flexing required.